Hey, North Dakota, Rob Port here.
And I'm Chad Oban. You're invited to a special live recording of Plain Talk on Wednesday, February 19th at the Peacock Alley in beautiful downtown Bismarck.
We'll be interviewing special guests, reacting to the latest headlines, and answering questions from the audience.
Admission is free, so plan to arrive early to grab a great spot. The reporting kicks off at 6 p.m., and after the show, Rob and I will stick around if for some reason you want to meet us.
That's Wednesday, February 19th at Peacock Alley in Bismarck, starting at 6 p.m.
We'll see you there.
This episode is presented by Dakota Resource Council. For nearly 50 years, DRC has worked across North Dakota to protect our land, water, and future.
Dakota Resource Council has definitely been shaping policy at the local, state, national levels. What role does DRC play in shaping that policy?
It's important for my people because we are grassroots people. We've always been grassroots people, Indigenous people, and having the tools and the resources that Dakota Resource Council can provide would up your game so much that, you can win and you can face these decision makers head on.
Become a member, volunteer, and take action, or donate today at drcinfo.org.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you. And before we get started, we got a big show today. First of all, Aaron Oban sitting in, guest hosting for the first time. Aaron.
Hi. Good morning.
Happy to have you on. Chad is not on vacation. I've been to say he is actually working his day job. Although I always like to insinuate that he's on vacation.
He does occasionally need to do his day job.
He does occasionally have to work.
Yep, he does.
And also we got a busy show. We're about to talk to the Attorney General about the ongoing debate over truth in sentencing legislation. So we'll be talking about that. Also later in the show, we're going to have Governor Kelly Armstrong on. We're starting to see some of these bills come to the House floor. House debate over property taxes got a little feisty yesterday with Representative Ben Koppelman, bringing his bill. That got defeated. Also moving some amendments on the House floor for the governor's bill, which were mostly defeated. The one thing that they did succeed at was taking the income tax portion of the governor's property tax bill out. That was something that was amended in by committee. The governor didn't request for that to be in there. That was amended in by the committee, was taken out by the House floor. Frankly, I think that's a good thing. If we want to do income taxes, let's do it separate. No need to complicate the already complex property tax debate with income taxes. We could do that separately. Anyway, we're going to talk about that with the governor. But now let's go to our Attorney General. And first of all, I want to ask you a very important question, Drew. I saw from the governor's social media yesterday that the Girl Scouts were at the Capitol selling cookies. And I saw that the governor had the good taste, he's a man of culture, to stock up on caramel delights. And so I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite first of all, did you get Girl Scout cookies? Did they visit your office?
They do every year, not even just legislative sessions. And I did not see them yesterday. I've been in meetings wall to wall, and I'm actually feeling bad. They'll come back though, because they're very persistent.
He was hiding out in his office, avoiding the pressure of the Girl Scout sales.
I love their cookies.
I know.
I like the one that I don't even know what it's like a dry kind of cookie, but it's drenched in chocolate. Is it the drizzle over the top of it, and there's chocolate on the bottom, and there's drizzle over the top, and there's just sort of a wafer, whatever that one is.
So cut like a shortbread,
something like that, but with chocolate on it.
So
they're great.
Yeah, they are great. They are fantastic, and I think you can tell a lot about a person by what kind of Girl Scout cookie that they like.
Drew likes a dry cookie. I'm frankly a little surprised by that.
With chocolate on it.
I'm pretty sure that their caramel delight should maybe be a controlled substance. I don't know. Drew, we might want to talk about that legislation in the future.
Yeah,
But
don't give the legislature ideas because they actually will probably do
well,
something.
okay, yeah, that was a joke. First of all, cookies do not need to be a controlled substance. Let's not give anybody ideas. Drew, you did not come here to talk about cookies. You came here to talk about truth in sentencing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the most recent development is we got a new fiscal note for it.
Yeah.
And it's a big one, 269 million. I'm going to assume you don't agree with that.
Yeah, let's talk about that right out of the chute. It actually illustrates so well what this now 2-year-long quest has been to get information out of DOCR, to get candid assessments by them of their programs and what they do, all of which is having substantial daylight shed on it, even as we speak, every day. There's more and more. So I'm glad that you mentioned the fiscal note. Anybody who reads our bill casually will understand why right out of the gate, they start with a whopper. Because their quest is to make it seem extravagantly expensive so that people will turn away from the policy objectives. There's no other way to call it. Here's what their first words are. They are in complete disagreement with what the actual bill says. They start off by saying, and these are their words, by the way, this bill removes DOCR's authority to house inmates in transitional facilities. There's no polite way to say it. That is a blatant falsehood. And anybody who's read the bill knows it. It does no such thing. Its next words are the same: requiring residents to return to prison. Apparently, they're interpreting it as there's going to be a roundup of violent criminals that they've let out early, which for a long time they denied that they do. They do it all the time. The state is populated with violent criminals who have gotten out of DOCR after a fraction of their sentence was served. The bill is explicitly only proactive. That second sentence lies about that. It does nothing to transitional facilities except for making sure that people serve an appropriate sentence, the one that the judge gives them, before they go to the transitional facility back in the community. And it gets worse from there. I have now dealt with that as much as I'm going to deal with that. It is not worth the paper that it is written on. And right out of the gate, you can see that. That fiscal note it would be a joke if it weren't a matter of serious public policy debate. I have been going through this now for this material, and we've been looking at this, putting together a proposal for going on 2 years. We've had the input of lawmakers, prosecutors, some retired judges, people that will weigh in on it. And it's interesting. It's a modest proposal. It's truth in the sentencing that gets passed by the men and women in black robes that we hire and we pay in part to do the sacred thing of saying, how long should a criminal be in jail for the conduct that they were alleged to have committed, that they were charged with committing, that a jury concluded they committed, and now the judge passed the sentence. Our bill, by the way, only attaches to violent crime. It is only violent criminals that it is focusing on, and it says that a violent criminal needs to serve the time that the judge gave them. They can earn 15% if they follow all the prescriptions as the judge was sending them off to the DOCR. By the way, a judge could decide not to give them any sentence, any prison time. It's completely discretionary. But if a judge concludes in her assessment of the case or his assessment of the case, the jail time is merited, they're going to serve it. DOCR will look you in the face, and they stand up in legislative hearings, and I know they said it in your article the other day, Rob. They will say that, gosh, they don't know what the problem is. They don't have statutory authority to shorten sentences. Well, they're right about that, but they do it every single day. And they are returning violent criminals to our communities all across North Dakota. Violent crime has risen steadily every single year over the last 10 years. They will deny that and provide you no proof because they can't. Because we compile and publish the crime statistics for North Dakota, and we get them from police departments and sheriff's departments. And unless DOCR is prepared to say that those people are lying to us, violent crime and robbery have gone up every single year for the last 10 years. So they do this repeatedly. And when I point these things out, Rob, I'm going to take issue with you about something. I love your headline in your last column. You say the Attorney General is mired in a grudge match. And I take offense to that. I take offense to it because this is based on the merits or lack of merits of the DOCR arguments and on a long history now of policy enactments that at first they tried to obscure. They do it repeatedly. You just have to look at their statements. They're misleading. They are intentionally attempts to keep the curtain up so that people can't see what's going on at DOCR. And I feel like it's literally my sworn obligation to call these matters out, call them what they are, and not shrink from the debate. Now, we in the middle of this. It's been going on now for several weeks here. I said some weeks ago that this was going to be one of the most interesting policy debates in the legislative session. There are matters there's a bunch of interesting ones, and they're all important. But this one, this morning I got another call for some state's attorneys. And what I'm enjoying about it so much is that daylight drives its own reform. If we've been passionate about anything in my 3 years as Attorney General, it's daylight and shedding light on things and then standing back and being accountable for it. And as I said in the hearing, and as I said with the materials that we put out, the detailed materials about the policy stumble that is the DOCR and the intentional returning of violent criminals into our communities over and over and over and calling it other names. What I've said all along is we stand by those statements. I have yet to have anybody contest those matters in a meaningful way, other than to blandly dismiss them as you let them do 3 times in your column. They just say that's not true, and they move on.
Let me interject, because you object to the idea that this is a grudge match, but you have alleged some very serious things here. You have accused them
Very
of
serious,
blatant falsehood.
Yeah,
you have said that their fiscal note is not worth the paper it's written on.
I stand by that.
You're accusing them of lying so that they can release violent criminals back into our communities. The director of the DOCR, Colby Braun, works for Kelly Armstrong, who you say there's no tension with over this. Have you urged the governor to then fire this person who you say is lying to the public?
That's for the governor to do. He's inherited Colby Braun, and those I don't presume to tell governors who to employ or not.
Well, he inherited a number. He inherited a number of folks in the cabinet, the Attorney General, and he opted to get rid of some of them.
I'm not going to meddle in someone else's employment situation. That's up for others to determine. But when you call a question, like when they say right out of the gate, their first words, this bill removes DOCR's authority to house inmates in transitional facilities. That is a patent falsehood. That is patently false. It does no such thing. It just changes the time frame when they can go there. When they say it requires residents to return to prison, that is a blatant mischaracterization. It won't require the return of one prisoner. In fact, you know what I learned this week from someone intimately familiar with our parole board in North Dakota? Our DOCR routinely puts people up for parole, puts it in front of our parole board. DOCR the bureaucrats have already moved them out back into our communities. They've already said that violent criminal can go back to the community. They've already done that before the parole board is even acted. And it gets worse, believe it or not, because if the parole board rules on that and says, no parole for this person, any guesses on what happens to the status? You know the answer, don't you? You know, it doesn't change. They don't go back to the prison. This isn't Drew Wrigley saying this. This is what's happening with the daylight that's being shed on this, and it is all coming home to roost. And people now know that when they look you in the eye and say, well, we can't let people out early, what they really mean is we call it still incarcerated when they go back to your community. When we send a sex offender, as they have done recently, we send a sex offender who got sentenced to 5 years for perpetrating sex offenses on children, got 5 years in the state pen. We sent them home really, really early, back to a community center for our little transition work over there. And we let them have work release. Would it surprise your listeners that work release was Dairy Queen? I wonder if they would think, gosh, there's a chance they might see a child there. And I wonder if they'd be surprised that defendant perpetrated on 3 more children. I wonder if they'd be surprised that he then was prosecuted by federal authorities, sentenced to 300 months in federal prison, and that our DOCR would say he didn't recidivate because under their definition, he didn't go back to North Dakota DOCR. So they let him out too early. They let him out too early. They didn't supervise him appropriately. And then he got prosecuted again after hurting 3 more kids. And under their definition, it's all good. He didn't recidivate. That's the truth.
Okay, the good news, Rob, is that I didn't actually have to prepare a lot for this because I assumed I would maybe get to ask one question. This is proving to be true. Can I just back up a little bit? So, in effect, Attorney General, what Senate Bill 2128 would do are a couple things, right? Add a couple more offenses to the list of mandatory minimum crimes, correct? Just a couple. I know you've minimized that, but in effect, it is what it would do, right?
It adds 2, yeah.
And in addition,
assaulting officers or fleeing through the communities in a way that is a felony and endangers the community. Yeah, they're short.
But overwhelmingly, it would limit or remove the authority for DOCR to manage where and how that inmate serves his or her time, right? I mean, I just want to understand this as somebody who's no longer sitting in the legislature listening to this stuff all day long. I don't live it every day like you do. I want to make sure that I understand exactly what your bill is trying to do.
Yeah, I think you encapsulate what it says is when a judge says, I'm sentencing you to 5 years in prison for your violent crime, it would say DOCR doesn't get to say, oh, you're still in prison when you're back in the community working at Dairy Queen.
And are you equating back in the community as being in a transitional?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Or a minimum security correction center.
It's not a minimum security. It is a back in the community halfway house dormitory. They don't have bars on the doors. They are not restricted for coming and going.
So that does not include places like the Missouri River Correctional Center.
No. Wait.
I'm trying to understand.
We would consider that that's incarceration. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. It just says you have to be incarcerated, whether it's more secure out of the DOCR main building here or what you might call a less secure facility, as long as they are incarcerated, but not in a halfway house, not in a community dormitory.
And so aren't places like the Missouri River Correctional Center and the Women's Correctional Center in New England included as being places where a, quote, violent criminal can no longer go until they have served, is it 50% of the time given? But I mean, I'm trying to figure out what is this, because if it does limit that, you're going to run out of space quick and you're going to cost a lot more money.
What it limits is the halfway house. But if they're incarcerated, and there's talk now, and I'm told, I mean, the governor will speak to this maybe when he's on. I saw this morning on an ad the governor is proposing lots more prison spaces. They're calling them bed space, but it's prison spaces. And that security officials will determine what is who deserves or who needs a super secure lockup like we have at DOCR itself, the main facility here, versus something that is still there locked up and they are incarcerated and cannot go out into the community and work, but they don't have to.
At RTC, they can.
Pardon me?
At Missouri River Correctional Center, they can. So I'm confused about.
It would change that aspect of it. Yeah, I mean, as it is right now, nobody's offered any possible solutions. The DOCR has just done what I've tried to make clear in the first part of the show. They've just gone around and completely mischaracterized it, both for the cost and what it does. And they're trying to scare people off. And what's been nice is we put together these materials. We gave them to several legislators. I'm meeting with several more today. People are calling me now, are really getting engaged on this. I've sent it on to all the state's attorneys. And it's weird. Not one person is, including anybody from DOCR, has come into my office right here and said, here on page 5, here's something that you have wrong. Because I told people, I will, anybody who knows me, I'll do this. I'll own that. You tell me something's wrong on page 5, I'm going to point out. I'll point it out to the next person I hand that pamphlet to. But they don't. They mischaracterize the bill. They don't offer up any solutions on anything or to concerns that they have about, well, what about minimum security? What about this? What about that? Work with us a little bit on it. Let's put some light on for you. Not at all. They are in mischaracterization mode. I know that bothers Rob. I don't know what else to call it. When someone says the light is on in that room and it's off, well, when someone says the light is on in that room and the light is off, I don't know what else to call it. We're all looking at the room.
Well, let's
focus
on it, because I know you disagree with the fiscal note that they've just put on, and we
Well, don't you?
I think we can all acknowledge
Don't
that.
you?
Well, hold
I
on.
mean, how can you agree with it when it says there's going to be a roundup of prisoners and there's not?
I didn't say if I agreed with it or not.
Okay.
What I'm saying is we're all aware of the phenomenon where death by fiscal note, where someone will inflate the cost of a bill in an attempt to kill it. I don't know that that's what's going on here or not. What they have alleged is that would you at least agree that there's going to be an additional cost to doing this? Because if we're going to keep people in these facilities longer than they are, like you just said, if a light goes on in the room, they got to be somewhere. They're going to take up space. They're going to take up resources. That has a cost. Cells have costs. Health care inside these facilities has costs. Food has costs. Guards have costs. So what is the additional price tag? Because there is one, right?
Yeah, I think there'll be some additional price tag. It's not nearly what you're implying. Keep this in mind. You know what the most important piece of data would be? There are like 2 or 3 in these articles you've written recently that they don't have. Miraculously, they just don't have it. Senator Myrdal asked a question at the Senate hearing. Just asked him blandly, well, how many crimes are committed by people who get out earlier than their sentence was supposed to be? Oh, he said, we don't know. I don't know. We don't keep that data. It's interesting. Every time they get to a data point that would actually shed some light on the efficacy of their programming, they just don't keep it. So she asked him next, well, when can we get it? I mean, that's pretty important, right? How many crimes are being committed? And he said, well, I think he said like 10 years. They would compile it like over 10 years, not 10 minutes. Nobody believes, by the way, just talking to people behind the scenes who heard that, nobody believes they don't already have the information or that it wouldn't be easy for them to get. And if they can't get it easily and they don't have it, what an abdication of responsibility. Because one of the cost things here, folks, is going to be the cost offset of crimes that will not be committed by people who recidivate at high levels. And you won't have a victim. That's the most important. Then you won't have an investigation, a prosecution, a jury sitting in there, judges having to reach conclusions, county officials having to lock up, then getting sent out to the pen. You're going to have a whole pile of crimes that will never be committed by the people who are getting out and still have 80% of their sentence left. They'll never be committed. DOCR will tell you 40%, 40 something, I may be off by 1 or 2. 40 some percent of the people at their DOCR facility are there because they recidivate. And they got a nice chart on their website. Again, this isn't me arguing this. As you read the fine print, it's like them providing it and nobody's noticing. Their recidivism is you committed another crime within 3 years and got returned to DOCR. The example I gave you, if you get out and you get convicted and sent to federal prison, not a recidivist. If you go back to Cass County, kick the crap out of somebody at a gas station and get sent to jail for 10 months, not a recidivist.
I don't think there's any question that there's a problem that recidivism rate that they have is limited. It doesn't tell the full story. We could talk about why that is. Working with statistics over the years, it can be hard to get when you're dealing with multi-jurisdictional issues. Sometimes it's hard to gather data across lines. But how do we know that people who serve 85% of their sentences, as your bill calls for, how do we know that they won't recidivate? Do you have the recidivate rate? I mean, you're saying that these crimes wouldn't be committed, but we know a lot of people who go to jail, even if they serve their full sentence, they can still come out and commit crime. Most of the people who go in jail, it's not like we're disappearing them forever. Just about everybody who goes to prison, even if they serve their full term, are getting out again. What's their recidivism rate?
Yeah, by your logic, we should just close the prison. It's like the people who stand up at hearings and they say, well, if we get longer,
that is not fair, and that is not what I'm arguing. I am not saying that we should close the prison, and I would not misrepresent my argument.
If it's not going to do, I'm not.
But listen, you want to call people liars and accuse them of misrepresenting. What's the recidivism rate? What is the recidivism rate for people who serve 85% of their sentences?
I know that it's 0 between the 20% where they get out typically here and the 85%. And now what the recidivism rate would be on the other side of that, I don't know, but you've saved yourself an enormous pile of crimes being committed by violent criminals getting out early just by incapacitating them. Now, DOCR will tell you.
Aren't you assuming that it's saving an enormous amount of crimes? I mean, you don't have that data any more or less than anybody else does. You are assuming, which is fine. You can do that, but
Well, I don't know how you wouldn't assume that if they're by their own statistics, the people that get out are returned to prison at a 40% recidivism rate. They just don't tell you the number of crimes they've committed. They're telling you almost half, by their narrow definition, are coming back because they recidivated. That's them saying it, not me. That's them.
In other states that have implemented something similar, truth in sentencing legislation, have we seen a reduction in recidivism rates?
It's different everywhere you look. It's really, that's been one of the eye-opening things for me, is recidivism in every state is what they call it. And there are relief valves out of that or not, depending on the state. Our legislation has relief valves, as I think it should. It still has, the governors still have clemency power. And then the parole board still has parole power, but it defines it as you got to serve 50% of that. So, I mean, there's still, it's different in every state as you go around. It's really very difficult. I don't even know.
How do we know then that, I mean, if the goal of this is to address the recidivism problem, then how do we know that implementing this, which is going to have a price tag, even if it's not what the DOCR says it is, you're going to be asking the taxpayers to put more people in jail, that's going to, or keep more people in jail.
Keep them,
and it's going to cost more money. So how do we know it's going to reduce recidivism?
Like I said, by definition, that people are locked away. I mean, there's a couple things. You're right. Reforming the criminal is one of the objectives for sure. So is punishment, and so is public safety that comes from putting dangerous people in jail. And again, our bill doesn't make a judge put them in jail for aggravated assault or rape or what have you. What it says is, if a judge, in her or his wisdom, in looking at the compendium, the entirety of that person's criminal history, that what they did, the whole thing, what they did in this act and everything else, if the judge concludes that they're going to, society needs to be protected with a 5-year sentence, the judge, who's accountable to all the people on this podcast and everybody listening, is going to pass that penalty. What happens on the other side of that? It's interesting. Like I say, DOCR will talk a lot about programs and things that they're doing, and it sounds really good. But two things that are really important for your listeners to know. One, I stood in the hearing there, as I've done for the last 2 years, and just kind of put up my hands and said, I'm ready for it. Give me your information. We're curious. I'll share it with everybody that I'm sharing this other information with. Give me your information that shows that your programs work, and show that they can work when people are there for a fraction of the time they were sent to prison. And just give us any information, anything, any data, any charts, graphs, anything. Colby Braun stood up 15 minutes after I was talking and said nothing. 2 weeks. I said, 2 years I've been criticizing them on this. Still don't have any of that information. It doesn't exist. And part of it, here's the other thing. When they talk about their programs as a way for them to look like, hey, it doesn't look good, we've got all these great programs. My chief deputy even went out there for a tour and was told about all the great drug, alcohol, mental health, all the treatment stuff, all the options, all the things that are available. Interestingly, though, when we start this bill saying people are going to have to stay there longer, one could logically conclude, oh, well, good. Longer time for drug treatment, alcohol treatment, antisocial behavior treatment, what have you. Instead, they start saying things out loud to reporters and others like, there won't be any treatment. If they do this bill, there won't be any treatment. We aren't going to be able to have any socialization back to society. All that goes away with this bill. Really interesting. All of a sudden, they'll say or do anything, and it's right here in writing, Rob. It's all over these columns. They say these things that are demonstrably false, even by comparison to their other statements about what a great job they're doing out of the prison with people. So to ask me, I don't know. I don't know what recidivism will look like at the end of 85% of a violent crime sentence served, but I know this: they will have been, on average, they'll be there about 60% of more time than they're serving now. That'll be more time for drugs treatment, more time for alcohol treatment, more time for mental health treatment, and more time to make an assessment. Geez, you know what? I don't want to come back here. I don't want to be back in prison.
So I want to ask one.
Actually, we actually have we're out of time. which I hate to say because they have the governor waiting on the other side of this. So, and obviously there's some questions here that we need to ask him as well. Drew, I do really appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate it too, because I think you're addressing the seriousness of the topic by giving us a forum to discuss it, and it's to be continued, because I continue to believe this is one of the more interesting debates going on, because it goes to the heart of what we do around here. It's about transparency, accountability, and an actual assessment of matters. And so I genuinely appreciate the opportunity to come on and discuss a matter of this importance. Thank you.
This episode is presented by Dakota Resource Council. For nearly 50 years, DRC has worked across North Dakota to protect our land, water, and future.
Dakota Resource Council has definitely been shaping policy at the local, state, national levels. What role does DRC play in shaping that policy?
The industry is talking to people one at a time, and what DRC does is organize local groups and listen to people, and our voices are heard.
Become a member, volunteer, and take action, or donate today at drcinfo.org.
Welcome back to Plain Talk. We just finished up an interview with the Attorney General. Now, I should note, this is kind of one of those happy accidents where I didn't plan on having the Attorney General and the Governor on. The Attorney General asked to come on. The Governor asked to come on. The Attorney General wanted to talk about his truth in sentencing bill. The Governor wanted to talk about property taxes. I thought these are two great things to talk about because they're two very important debates happening at the legislature. But it's hard to ignore. In the previous interview, you heard the Attorney General Drew Wrigley say some things about the Department of Corrections. He accused them of blatant falsehoods. He said that their fiscal note that they just represented on the truth in sentencing bill is not worth the paper it is written on. It would be a joke if it weren't a matter of a serious policy debate. He said their goal is to make it extravagantly expensive so that people turn away from the bill, and also called their approach to, basically corrections at this point an abdication of responsibility. Now, Kelly, I wanted to ask you about that, and we're going to get into your property tax bill. The House debate over property taxes got a little feisty yesterday, so that'll be interesting. But I wanted to ask you about this because the Attorney General's talking about a cabinet member. Colby Braun is a carryover from Governor Burgum's cabinet. The Attorney General is basically accusing him of some pretty serious things here. What do you make of that? What is your confidence in Mr. Braun?
I have total confidence in Colby. I think they do a good job. They've been on prioritization since 2023. DOC, it's tough. There's a reason we introduced, or we're working to try and find more DOCR jail space. But I try and not make things personal. I try and not do that. I think it is a policy discussion. I think everything old is new again. Shouldn't shock you guys that maybe a former defense attorney and a prosecutor might not agree on all of this stuff, but I haven't looked at the fiscal note. I will look at it. My team will look at it, but turns out when you're going to lock a bunch of people up for more period of time, it's expensive, Rob. That's the reality of the situation. And we're a long ways towards the end of the session. And hopefully by the end, we'll either have policy that makes sense, or we'll have to deal with how that works its way through the system.
I'm sorry, Aaron. Aaron and I are still working on our back and forth. So, Aaron, I didn't know if you.
I mean, not just back and forth, but it's also coming out of, the Attorney General might call it a conversation. I would consider it more of a filibuster. There wasn't a lot of conversation. You can tell he's very frustrated. And I guess I just hope that maybe some cooler heads will prevail. And I know that based on the number of years I worked with the governor when he was then Senator Armstrong, he's got a pretty cool head about him. And I anticipate that this will all work out, I hope, in terms of what's best for the policy, and that it is not personal. It's not about personalities. And there's a lot of that at play right now.
Well, I spent my entire first 10 years of my life in courtrooms with prosecutors and cops and judges who I disagreed with a lot. And still could go out and have a cheeseburger with them or whatever. But I've also spent my entire adult life in this policy space. So when we get closer to where this looks like whatever the final version of this is, I will utilize my staff, but I will also go through it. It's not the only thing going on in my life right now. We had property tax yesterday. Obviously, Superintendent Baszler broke last week. We had Fargo-Moorhead Chamber, rural economic development. We're having a lot of fun, and there's a lot of positive things going on. And there's no doubt that the Attorney General is very passionate about this issue.
Let's talk property taxes, because that was on the House floor yesterday. First, Representative Nathy's bill, which carries some of your idea. Obviously, as he said when he was on the show last week, as you have also indicated, that bill is the result of a lot of different people putting ideas on the table and amalgamating them together. I guess we call it kind of your plan because you're the governor. But that bill was on the floor. There were some attempted amendments, an amendment that the committee put in with about $50 million in income tax reduction, basically eliminating the bottom tax bracket for income taxes. That was stripped out, which frankly, from my perspective, I think that's a good thing. I don't know that we need to confuse the property tax debate with income tax debate. But the other thing is there are other amendments put in by Representative Koppelman, who, had some different things he wanted to put in your bill, and then he had his own bill, which got defeated later in the day. Things got a little feisty. Are you happy with the way this debate's proceeding, though?
Yeah, I'm happy people are talking about it. Do I like all the amendments that came on? No, I think trying to give some flexibility in the caps is a worthy goal. I think the way it was done probably means there aren't really caps, which is problematic, but it's going to move forward. And I think by the end of the day, it's two completely different issues, but it's also similar. I think the process is moving forward, and we continue to talk about it, and we can continue to move forward. I also am glad that the income tax came out of it. I mean, if it stayed in, it wouldn't have bothered me necessarily either. But I think property tax and income tax are two different debates, and I don't know if that's the last. I mean, there are different tax bills that are moving from one chamber to the other, but I think the real issue here is that this bill moves forward. It got off. I think it's in appropriate and gets there, and we continue to work on it. I don't think it'll be the first bill on my desk, Rob. I was kind of hopeful, but you can be aspirational once in a while. But I think by the end of this session, we will I'm really confident we're going to have a good property tax proposal.
Well, I'm kind of glad it's not, because it is complex, and it's worthy of the debate that it's getting. One thing,
sort of a big deal. I mean, big deals take some time, as the governor knows.
If I can ask one quick follow-up before Erin asks her question. You said that some of the amendments were done probably means they're on a cap. What changes are you talking about? Because one would allow voters to basically do away with the cap for 10 years at a time if they approve it. And then I think the other that's the one. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you're allowing local political subs to put it on the ballot every election, and it waives the cap for 10 years, I'm not really sure how you have a cap. They also excluded townships. There's some issues on levies, but it's fine. I mean, this is part of the process. You move it forward, and you take some of these ideas, and then you spend some time and you study them. But I wouldn't be comfortable buying down local political subs property taxes and growing that relief over a decade. If they could waive the cap portion of it for a decade, I think that's exactly what we're trying to get away from.
I mean, it would be sort of interesting to see if people are really that upset about property taxes, if they would vote to waive them that cap. It'd be very interesting to see if they would actually do it.
The problem I have with it, Erin, though, is that's fine if you waive it, but how do you get it back on the ballot if you want to reinstate it? If the local political sub on the ballot to waive it for 10 years, but
it's up to 10 years. I mean, right? Up to 10 years?
Sure.
Couldn't they do it for less?
They could, but why would they?
Well, I don't know, because you'd hope people would be responsive. If you're a locally elected official, you'd hope you'd be responsive to what you're hearing from your community. But
I agree with that sentiment, but I would also say past performance is probably the best predictive measure of future results.
I think we are where we're at in this debate right now, because there's been a lot of local officials who have not paid attention to how people feel about their property tax bills.
Yeah, I think that may be, I mean, as somebody who thinks that's a problem, I also think a little bit that might be, I mean, I don't know if flippant or harsh is the right word, but I mean, they're trying to do what, I mean, any car with lights on it is more expensive than it was 10 years ago. I mean, you don't want your local governments to be completely utilitarian. I think, and I've said this a lot, I don't know if I've said it on this, I think the problem in this debate is the conversation has always revolved around the relationship between state government and local government. And I don't think we've spent enough time focusing on the conversation between government and taxpayers. And I think if we can start reframing that way, we're in a better spot.
Well, I also feel like and I'm not entirely sure how we completely got here. There's probably not one finger to point, but we're living at a time where people want lots of things and don't want to pay for it. And if you want things in your community, guess what? It's not free. And it's not.
Also, we're living at a time where most people have seen increases in their values of their houses, and we've seen economic growth, and North Dakota's been on a pretty dang good 20-year run. And so, I mean, how we do it, how we calculate it, I mean, people are seeing that. But it's still, I mean, we all know people who are, a retired city worker, a retired teacher. The fact that their house has doubled in value doesn't change that they're still on a fixed income. And,
Agreed.
If your house has doubled in value in the last 6 years, I don't care whatever community you're in, your services haven't doubled in 6 years.
Sure.
Well, there's a reason why in the income tax world we don't tax unrealized gains. We don't levy a tax until you realize the gains. But if you tax the increase in my property's value, that's not additional wealth that I have. That wealth on paper, I don't have it in my bank account. So if you're taxing me on it, it creates a problem. So I think
for sure.
But that is one thing that Representative Koppelman brought up. Is his approach is essentially it buys out a percentage. It's all based on a percentage. Yours is based on a dollar amount credit that over time, you have a formula basically that it increases over time with the legacy fund. His argument is and when he was on this show as well, his argument is the percentage is better than the credit. Can you address that? Because when Leader LaFleur kind of stood up and ended the floor debate, right? That's kind of the tradition. When the leader stands up, nobody speaks after. They don't always adhere to it, but supposedly that's what's supposed to happen.
I just never talked after Aaron talked. That was my.
Oh yeah, okay.
Wow, buttering up the interviewers. Leader LaFleur, he made a sustainability argument. He said he's on your bill because he feels that's a sustainable approach. Is that the argument that the credit is more sustainable?
I appreciate anybody advocating for my approach. I would make it a little different. I would say the people who need it the most get the most relief the quickest, and the people who pay the most get the most relief over time. There are not a lot of places in politics you get to do that. Right? You're making decisions on, anybody over a certain income bracket still pays income taxes. Anybody under an income tax bracket doesn't pay taxes. I like this approach because the people who desperately need it the most get it first. But the people who pay the most will end up getting the most relief over time as that legacy fund grows. So I think it ends up doing it. I think it's just two different ways to attack a problem. We were very cognizant of trying to deliver the relief to the people who can't afford the increase, what we were just talking about, the fixed income and that, but also recognizing that if you pay more, you will get more relief. It'll just take a little longer.
So I have heard you talk for years about kind of your take on taxes, that they should be low and broad-based. Is that a fair kind of characterization?
Yeah.
I was most interested to see that your proposal had a path to zero, because that is not in line with what your stance on taxes typically is. And we're in a great position where, boy, that legacy fund and all of the commodity prices that are helping with that, but that's not a forever thing either.
No, but it's earnings on the legacy fund.
Well, but still, it's taking people down to zero.
Yeah, and I think part of that is I started campaigning a year ago talking about income taxes. Turns out I got an earful from a lot of North Dakotans from one end of the state to the other, big communities and small communities. And, when you have a legacy fund, and one of the debates in this that has been a little frustrating, and partially because of some of the places it comes from, is I'm really, really protective of the legacy fund, and particularly the legacy fund principle. But as we're going to continue to utilize this to invest and have the growth, I think delivering relief to North Dakota citizens that they can actually see protects the legacy fund, because we're using the bottom stream. We're using the bottom stream of the earnings, and we're not taking it. And we're also making it so that eventually you don't have that forever general fund expenditure. But
I was just surprised that your relief took it down to zero, that your path was to zero. I was just surprised with that.
I think part of that is we are creatures of our constituency. And I think any politician, I used to say in DC, if you forget who you work for, which is the North Dakota citizens, you're going to have problems in DC, but you're going to have more problems at home. This is the issue people care about. I feel very comfortable in saying this is the number one spending issue, and far and away the biggest issue I heard on the campaign trail for over a year. So we have a path to do it. We can do it responsibly, and I think we should.
It is I mean, what Aaron's bringing up is a concern of mine as well, in that I think people should feel their government, right? And when government gets bigger, they should feel that. And I worry about disconnect. I think a lot of the problems in Washington D.C. are and I'm preaching to the choir with you, Kelly, who just got done working out there, but it feels like a lot of it is there's a disconnect between what our federal government costs and what Americans pay for it. And we're essentially, we Congress delivers what the people want, which is a lot of government programs in different ways, and we can have a debate. We all have our different preferences for which programs we like and which we don't. But, Congress delivers them, and then we finance it with budget deficits. Now, obviously, we can't do that in North Dakota. We have a balanced budget law in North Dakota, but I think it is a valid concern about disconnecting people from the cost of their government. And that is sort of the argument. Now, ultimately, I agree with your path to zero. I don't think that principle has to apply to everything, and we have to tax everybody in every way possible. But it is a valid concern, I guess.
Well, I would give two things on that. One, I don't disagree, and I think by the way, I think there are people that talk about maybe it shouldn't be to zero, maybe it should be 75%, maybe it should be 80%. I would say two things. One is good and one is bad. Go watch how many people show up at a local budget meeting now, a local county budget meeting now. Any county in North Dakota, nobody shows up. Nobody participates at that level.
About the only person showing up for some of these is a guy who wants to rant about like Jews and Nazis and stuff. It kind of seems like those are the sort of people who are showing up. I think
yeah, I think we did too.
We lost Kelly.
Well, I would suggest that it's not any different at the state level. I mean, you're not getting a bunch of casual citizens, everyday citizens going to the Capitol to testify on the property tax bill.
They should. I wish they would. And
you're getting it on the 10 Commandments. You're getting it on the book bans. You're getting it on, those kind of bills, but not on.
I do think it's better. Like, I think the fact that there's videos in those committee rooms has improved things. Mm-hmm. Just during my career, which now spans 2 decades, as evidenced by my bald spot. Welcome back. We lost the governor for a minute. I'm assuming it's because of all those lawmakers down the hall hogging the Wi-Fi is why the Zoom is not working great. We'll just blame it on the legislative branch.
I don't know. This all seemed to work smoother when I just did it on my iPad, walking in my kitchen table in DC.
Yeah. What we were talking about was obviously the property tax debate and disconnecting people. One interesting thing, though, that came up during that House debate yesterday as well, and I think it was Representative Jim Casper that brought it up, is he's concerned about the political risk of not delivering enough immediate tax relief. And he's saying, the credit is only, as it was originally written, was $1,550. I think it was cut down to $1,440 with the income tax. And I guess I don't know if removing the income tax amendment puts your credit number back up to $1,550. But anyway, his argument was it's not enough. So if North Dakotans aren't seeing enough immediate relief on their tax, this bill does nothing, and we're going to end up with another measure 4. Do you view that as a risk?
3 out of 4 houses would get this relief. 1 out of 3 would pay no taxes in the next biennium.
That sounds
That's relief.
fairly fast.
Huh?
That sounds fairly fast.
I'm not scared of another measure 4. I don't think we should legislate being scared of initiated measures. I think we should legislate based on what measure 4 brought to the discussion. There are a lot of people that voted no on measure 4 that Rob, Aaron, that probably aren't going to vote no again if a measure comes. But I mean, we still have to do something that is responsible and durable. And I think this does both of those things. So, ag groups as we go through this session, are going to want to talk about it. I think, the business community would like to see something, but one of the reasons we stayed in the primary residence is because if you deliver it across the entire property tax spectrum, you aren't delivering enough for people to notice. $300 on a commercial building isn't there, but that's why the caps are important, because otherwise you could end up shifting that burden to other areas when you're doing it. And then the other reason is the one you hear the most of is people in their houses. And the argument that going to zero, it doesn't have people have skin in the game, which is what you hear down here. It's one of those buzzwords, is valid. But I don't know where we're at in the editing after I got cut off, but nobody goes to the budget meetings at the local municipal subs anyway. But also, you are still closest to your local government. Like if you're not having good law enforcement, if you're not having good garbage removal, if you're not having those types of things in a municipality, you have access to those elected officials. I mean, we have a really accessible legislature, but you still have more access at that level. So I think if you are going to go down in this space, this is a pretty good place to do it.
Do you?
Yeah, I agree.
I think also I like the political risk of it not being enough. I don't know. I mean, even though, a $1,500 credit or $1,400, whatever it ends up being, even though that doesn't eliminate my property tax bill, it might be the first time I shouldn't say that. My property tax bill actually went down a little bit last year. But for a lot of people, it's going to be the first time in a long time that their bill went down. And I think even seeing that with the promise of more, I think is going to be a profound impact politically.
Well, and the reform piece of this, and by the way, that has been, we haven't talked about it a lot on this, but that's been the bigger piece. The $500 for the primary residential credit last year was great until it was backfilled at $497. And so the reform piece on the other end, the relief will grow faster than the property tax budget will grow. So you'll see more relief in 2 years than you did this year, provided the legacy fund earnings continue to make a profit.
So the only thing I've heard as the reform piece is the cap, right?
Yeah.
Are you trying to come up with any other potential solutions? Maybe not in this session, but moving forward. It's not like you have a 2-year term and you're out. But it probably shouldn't be the only thing. Any other creative things you're thinking about?
But we got to do the first thing first.
I agree. I agree.
And I think the one thing we're going to have to figure out, and we recognize this when we do this, is nobody's getting taxed. Well, Ray's probably not a good example because it grew significantly, or the oil patch, but I always say animus. Like nobody's getting taxed out of their house in animus, right? So it's the small political subs where a 3% cap could be like $700. We have to have some real conversation about that. And then I think there are a lot of different ways in which we do that. I think one of the relief that's just going to continue to come over time is as the Common Schools Trust Fund grows, we have the ability to continue to utilize that and take some of that burden for K through 12 off of the local shares. But no, I'm always interested in figuring out how we can fund government better and more efficiently. And I think that's one of the conversations. But so the other side of this is there's people who think the cap should be lower, or we should include specials in it. And I'm like, at some point in time, we can't have the state government making every decision for Fargo or Bismarck or Mandan or Mott. And so I think this is a good place to start. And I think one of the things is it'll probably change the dynamic a little bit. Instead of being told, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this, we'll have our local political subs who are our friends and our partners in this experiment of governing the state of North Dakota coming here and saying, okay, this is why it didn't work for us. We have to work on something. But it changes the dynamic.
Sure. And part of the reason I ask is because there are already programs at the state level that are funded that do create pretty significant property tax relief. I mean, if you're upgrading your entire, city's water system and you get a grant from the state to do it, the only other option for funding those kinds of infrastructure improvements are property taxes.
Yeah, and I think, and by the way, I think in rural North Dakota, this is a longer term conversation. I'm not sure how it affects the tax burden, but a lot of these smaller rural communities have real significant sewer, wastewater.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, as you know, I just left rural development, and the number of communities who will wait on the list at the state for a grant versus come to rural development for a low interest loan, then increasing their costs because they're waiting longer in hopes that they'll get free money from the state. I mean, at the same time that those programs could very well be cut from the federal government entirely.
Well,
I mean,
and the other answer, and we had a really interesting conversation about water the other day. A lot of the problem in the smaller communities is cost share. It's easy for Bismarck, Fargo, Minot, Grand Forks, Dickinson, Watford, Williston to do the cost share. It's a lot harder to do the cost share in Oaks. And so one of the reasons this was interesting is because we have the water buckets. So you don't, and part of the cost share conversation, I think, ends up being you have to have certain legislators vote against their own parochial interest. Because the smaller the community, the lower the cost. I mean, if we could do this right. So I think some of those conversations will continue to move forward. It was a good conversation in the water bucket because that water bucket's not competing with Fargo and not competing with Bismarck. So you don't have to convince Bismarck legislators to vote against their own self-interest or their own parochial interest in order to lower the cost share for a smaller community.
Well, it's a fascinating debate, and it's a complex debate. And again, I'm glad we're having it, and I think the governor's plan is going to continue to advance. We'll see what happens to it. I am worried a little bit about the 10-year exemption or allowing them to go to the voters over and over again. I think sometimes we see how that works with bonds where they just keep going to the voters and holding elections at odd times sometimes. The cap, I said at the beginning at your State of the State, the cap is the linchpin to this whole thing. Because if we don't have the cap and spending increases, property taxes outpace the growth of the credits that you're implementing, then we've accomplished nothing.
Worse than nothing. We've spent a whole bunch of state dollars and people are as frustrated as ever. And you got two former state senators on here who have been down this road before, and we've done that. And it wasn't because we didn't think we were delivering relief. I mean, Aaron, when we bought the 20 mills social services, we thought we were delivering relief.
Of course. Yep. Same thing with the K-12 funding formula.
We did. And part of the reason we haven't is a good reason. Houses are worth more money. Communities are growing. Those are all fascinating things. But I would say this, we do have to figure out a way to allow them flexibility. I mean, if the roof falls in the Walsh County Jail, they got to fix it.
Right. And that's what I was going to add. So I have not paid close enough attention. No offense. There is a lever in there for emergency situations, or there is not?
Governor declared emergencies and they can go to the vote. I mean, we had, or the original bill did have the voter approved ability to get past them. I do think a blanket 10-year, a bill waive it for 10 years without any other back end structure, I think, quite frankly, is a loophole you can drive the grain truck through. And so I think there's somewhere in between nothing and that would probably be more effective.
That was literally the metaphor that Representative Koppelman used for it on the floor yesterday. Was a hole so big you could drive a truck through it. So,
but was it specific to a grain truck? Because I noticed
not specifically a grain truck. So it depends on the truck. Was it a little S10 Chevy?
By the way, I don't know if that's coincidental or scary because I have not watched a single minute of floor session. As an ex-legislator, now current executive, it would just give me FOMO in a real meaningful way. So I allow them to do their work, and we will engage on issues as they ask for our help, or we really feel that we bring something to that conversation.
Governor, thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Nice to see you, Governor.
You too, Aaron.
Hey, friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Well, that was an eventful show, and not just because we had a little technical difficulty with the governor in the middle of it, where we lost him for a little bit and we brought him back for the conversation. So apologize for that. I'm going to blame the Wi-Fi at the Capitol.
Yeah, and he blamed me, which is
we should call new IT director Corey Mock.
I was going to take an opportunity to maybe take a shot at Corey Mock, but
why not?
You beat me to it.
Yeah, that's what we do, is we just roast everybody.
Which we haven't done to Chad as much as we should. Maybe we can close with that.
He's on vacation, so we'll let him relax. So he's not on vacation, he's working.
But he just wants to be talked about, which is happening. So
I can't help myself. So the Attorney General, I just, something's got to give in that debate, and I don't know what it is, because the Attorney General is insisting that the DOCR is lying to us and is releasing all these dangerous people, and I'm assuming he thinks the motivation is just that there's, a bunch of pie in the sky, I don't know, reformists or liberals or something who aren't seeing the reality, the impact of their policies. I don't know that I perceive the problem in our state as being as severe, acute as he makes it out to be. And I don't think that they're lying. I think they just have a different perspective on this.
Yeah. And it is always easy to assume the worst intentions of somebody who doesn't agree with you, like who just has a different perspective. And, I regret that we didn't have a chance to have more of a dialogue, like a back and forth, because that's not what that was. I wanted to understand the Attorney General's approach to this. Because if that was his approach throughout the last 2 years, which I don't know if it was or not, it doesn't make it easy to work with somebody if that is the approach you're going with. It's the whole honey versus vinegar thing. If that is how building coalitions and building some sort of consensus on. I don't know that that's the approach he's interested in.
I admit I have a bias in all this. I worked for 10 years with my father, and we did criminal defense work. It was a big part of it. He was a former cop. After he got done being a cop, he was a private investigator, and we worked for the defense. And so I have done work that has kept people out of jail, rightfully kept innocent people out of jail. I have seen how the deck is stacked against people who are accused in the criminal justice system. I have seen also what incarceration does to somebody. We had a case one time where a gentleman was accused of a homicide and spent 2 years in jail, pre-conviction, just while his case was adjudicated. He did not have a lot of money. We were appointed to work with the public defender, and he couldn't afford bail. He couldn't afford to get himself out of jail. He spent 2 years and then was acquitted. But that 2 years in jail changed him. So these are serious things. Going to jail, even for a short amount of time, life-changing. And I think we sometimes forget, it is the easy thing to do, I think, for the public to say, throw the book at them, because the people who end up in jail, almost all of them are guilty, right? We make mistakes, but almost all of them are guilty, and they've really done bad things. And I understand the public's desire for retribution. I get that. I think what we don't think about enough is eventually these people do get out. And I think what the Attorney General would tell us is nothing he's proposing is standing in the way of treatment or anything like that. The folks at DOCR say differently. I personally have been proud of a lot of the things that we've been doing in North Dakota in terms of being more focused on treatment, more focused on getting people the sort of skills and putting them in a position so that when they do get out, that they're in a position to not recommit crimes, that they're going to have skills, they're going to have treatment, they're going to have medication, and they're going to be in a position to contribute and not commit more crimes.
And get their families back, get whatever the situation is. That's what I think is a little bit missing in the conversation. And I think sometimes then you get accused of being soft on crime and, not wanting people to serve time as a response to something they did that was illegal. They broke the law. But I also think when you remove completely the human element of everything, not all manslaughter is the same. So that's what I wanted to ask him. Does it treat all people convicted of manslaughter exactly the same? Because when you just call everything a violent crime, well, yes, there are absolutely victims, and those victims deserve to be, to have the person who committed that crime against them to serve their time. Not all of those people are the same. They're not.
I would argue that even if you're talking about equivalent crimes, not all the inmates are the same, because some of them respond to rehabilitation efforts better than others. Some cooperate, some get more skills, some get the treatment that they need, and it works. Some it doesn't. And I just,
Of course.
I feel like
Yes.
system we need the flexibility to say it's working with this person, we can accelerate their release. It's not working with this person, they need more time in. And none of it's ever going to be perfect.
And it should be a calculated risk, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I thought that was the role of DOCR. And if that's not all working out the way it should, it doesn't mean you can't make some tweaks and adjustments that would prevent the more violent offenders from. I just think this eliminates that ability to also be responsive to.
But there is a rock and a hard place here. I mean,
For sure.
If the attorney general is correct, and that the head of DOCR and his staff are perpetrating falsehoods on the public and false legislature, and they're lying and they're releasing violent people into our communities, and it's contributing to a rise in crime in our state, then they should be fired.
Sure.
On the other hand, the governor who is no dummy in this area of public policy, who, as he said, has spent 10 years as a criminal defense attorney, to this day is an attorney. He says he has total confidence in his head of DOCR. So those are,
and then for the attorney general to characterize, just being wildly offended that it's being perceived that there's some sort of being at odds with each other. I'm sorry, but you all, like,
I'm not making this up. I'm not.
I've also seen, I've seen with my own eyes and listened with my own ears him characterize somebody who describes himself, in this case the governor, as being smart on crime, as being cute. Like, I don't know how you bring people together to find a reasonable solution to a problem you say exists, when that is the approach to the problem.
Democracy is hard.
It is.
And if you come to it from with the thinking, and I don't know. I mean, to the attorney general's credit, I mean, he has agreed to certain amendments to the bills. He has modified some things, so it's not like he's just completely saying my way or the highway. But I mean, if you come to this process thinking that the other side has to give in, and if they don't, they're a bunch of liars and everything else, I just don't think you're doing it right. I just don't.
And I just can't help but go back to what it was like being in those chairs in the Senate and listening, to the information you're provided at a hearing. If it feels like there was no genuine effort to really collectively work together on something, and again, I have no idea what that was like for the last 2 years, but if this is where all the grievances are being aired, it makes it a hell of a lot harder to make a decision on how to vote when there's only a green or a red button.
Let's pivot and talk about property taxes. I perceive the biggest risk, because the legislature's tried property. I mean, you served there, as did Kelly did. We've done a lot of stuff. We certainly have a lot of ongoing, quote unquote, property tax relief it's like 26% of the general fund now. We're spending a lot of money trying to keep property taxes low. It's not working. I think the biggest risk of what's going on in the legislature right now is they are going to water the cap down to the point where the whole property tax bill is ineffectual. I think that's the biggest risk. I am very, very worried about that.
You really think that that it will be watered down to that point? Because I'm not sure that they're willing to put that much money into another credit if they're.
Yeah. Well, in which case, I think what happens is we get something, it's ineffectual, and then we end up with something coming on a ballot measure, and who knows what that'll be? Maybe it'll be great. Our lived experiences, the proposals have not been so great, but the electorate may be upset to the point where they vote for something that's not great because they don't perceive the legislature as doing anything.
And not just that, but I also, as somebody who lives with the person who took on the position of chairing the coalition and raising a ton of money and spending a lot of his outside of the office time trying to defeat that last measure, people like Chad are tired. Like that's a lot of work to do, and you can't keep doing the same thing in that regard over and over again either. That said, I also agree with Governor Armstrong when he says you can't legislate under a threat of every single thing you're doing being responded to by a ballot measure.
So one of the great weaknesses of democracy and electoral politics is it does not reward anyone for telling the voters that they're wrong, even when the voters are most definitely wrong. And I think there is one of the fundamental problems with property taxes in North Dakota. We're seeing the debate right now. I don't live in Fargo. I don't have a dog in the hunt for what the Fargo Park District charges for pool fees or
I saw that.
or anything. But there's some people upset about that. And I can't help but think that there is a fundamental disconnect between where I want golf courses with golf pros and I want this big, beautiful pool, but I also don't want to pay for it.
But that's exactly what I was talking about, Rob, when I said I don't know if it's my generation. I don't know if it's just around here. I imagine it's, more widespread than just in North Dakota. But this idea that we can have all of these everything we want, and nothing's ever going to. Yeah. If it gets more expensive, we'll just have the state subsidize it. It blows my mind.
I don't want the legislature drilling down and deciding how many pickleball courts Wahpeton's going to have, which, by the way, I used as an example in a column. And then I had somebody from Wahpeton message me and say, what do you know about the pickleball courts?
You're always speaking directly to someone, aren't you, Rob?
And I'm like, I don't know anything. I was just made that up. I don't know anything. He's like, well, there's a big thing about pickleball courts here. And I'm like, man, I got so much on my plate. I don't even want to know what's going on with the pickleball courts in Wahpeton. All I know is that cannot be an issue that we're debating in the legislature. We have to allow local autonomy. And the thing is the voters locally, they have to have a cost benefit analysis. If you want the pickleball courts, your property tax bill, the park district levy is probably going to go up, or there's going to be a user fee somewhere. You're going to have to pay for them.
And all of this at a time when it also feels like people are maybe less engaged in like the civic and political process. I mean, if you want more pickleball courts, then you go and talk to your park board, right? I mean,
you pay for them. Right? You figure out a way. Like, there's got to be a fee.
But those are the folks who make the decision. And I'm also very good friends with somebody who serves on the local park board. There's very rarely folks coming to those meetings and advocating for either what they want more of or to pay less because they don't.
But where
although I also I can't listen to people say on one hand, I'm paying for schools that I'm not using. Well, then you should opt out of the parks you don't use, and you should opt out of the streets you don't drive on, and you should opt out of the fire, that never has to respond to your house.
Things benefit us. I mean, listen, our whole community benefits from having educated young people.
You're damn right it does. Yes.
I mean, I know you are better, even if you never had children.
Yes.
Benefiting from that when you go to the retirement home, and hopefully the nurse who's taking care of you is a qualified person who got a good education.
And you drive across the bridge, and the engineer who, helped make sure it was designed appropriately, and the construction crew who built it. Yep. We're all educated.
I just, I think it is a problem. I argue everything, and this is sort of my grand unifying theory for this era, is it's the most populist era we've ever lived in. Social media and the internet's a big part of it, and I know what I'm saying, that I owe my career to those things. I wouldn't have been on anybody's radar if I didn't have social media and blogging and everything to get started. But it has made it the most populous time era ever. And there is no reward right now for being the person to stand up and say, no, I'm sorry, you're all wrong. Like, you're all hopped up about this and you're all angry and you got your We the People shirts on and you're hooting and hollering. And it doesn't remove the immutable reality that you got to pay for the things you get. There are no such things as a free. I wrote a whole column about the school lunch issue thing. And
I'm also refusing to call it free lunch because
I don't like calling it free.
School state-funded school lunches.
Yeah,
Yep.
we're paying for it. All
Yep.
we're doing, we're spreading out the base of the people who pay for it, and we're going to give working families some relief. It's a good idea, and we should do it, but it ain't free because nothing's free.
Yeah, I'm with you on all of those.
All right. Well, that's we're going to put a pin in it there. Aaron, this is a delight. Thank you so much for sitting in.
Well, thanks for inviting me. You know, I was also prepared to just go through some of your very old blog posts about some of the lovely things that you had to say about me all those years ago. And I feel like we've really come a long way, Rob. You and
I could probably look up a few social media posts of you responding as well. But hey, that's democracy. And also, you got to remember, my career, I started as a 20-something writing on the internet about politics I had to learn as I go.
Turns out sometimes there is some wisdom in aging, right?
Yep, that's right. Hey, by the way, Aaron will be sitting in, not sitting in, but will be a part of our live show coming up next week on the 19th. We have one more recorded show, and then the show after that is going to be a live show. Aaron's going to be part of it. Of course, our other frequent co-host, Jessica Bell, J Bell,
yes,
will be a part of it. We're going to have
yes.
The person who will not be there is Kelly Armstrong, because he stuck out on us. He decided some namby-pamby meeting in Washington, D.C. more important than appearing on. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, he's got a job to do, and doing podcasts is low on his list of priorities. But anyway, that's of course coming up February 19th. If you're in the Bismarck area, I hope you stop by. It's at Peacock Alley. You want to be there by 6. Anyway, certainly appreciate it. We're going to stop there. Thank you so much.
It'd be fun. Thanks so much for inviting me, Rob. This was great. Appreciate it.
We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host, Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. You can tell a lot about a person by what kind of Girl Scout cookie that they like.
Drew likes a dry cookie. I'm frankly a little surprised by that.
With chocolate on it.